Hey everyone, Rob here, and today I'm going to be covering some of the settings inside of an FTP over SSL server. You'll notice up on the page here I have a Git repository called config templates, and what this is basically a great starting point for different services such as SSH or TMUX, or in this case vsftpd, our FTP server. And I try to put secure files up here that you can use as a starting point to secure whatever service you're trying to set up. So here we're going to start out with FTP over SSL, and what this is going to do with the configuration file is anonymous users are not going to be able to sign in or have any access. Only the local users are going to have access, and they're going to have upload and download permissions. They're going to be inside a restricted directory, so they won't be able to access every directory on the file system through FTP, only their home directory that was assigned to them. And I believe I said it, but they'll be able to download and upload files to their home directory only. The reason for using SSL is because FTP is not, when you send credentials to an FTP server, they're in clear text. Same thing with the files, they're transferred in clear text. So if anyone's listening, they can get your credentials, review the contents of a file. So you always want to encrypt that using SSL. The downside to it is the simple FTP command is not going to allow you to connect. So we're going to use LFTP and FileZilla. So one's a GUI application, which is FileZilla, the other's the terminal. And I'll show you how to connect to the SSL server using both of those. So first, inside the config file, I show you how to start from scratch. On any Ubuntu-based system, simply apt update and apt install vsftpd. Next thing we need to do is generate our certificates. And you'll see here we're putting the certificate in etcssl certs, and the private key is in etcssl private. And it's good for a year, 365 days, and this is typical RSA 2048. That's a typical key length for SSL connections. So let me copy this, and we're going to generate our certificate here. Now our country name is our 2-digit code. I'm in the United States, it's US. Our state, we have to type out this full name, so Colorado and not CO. Locality is the city, Colorado Springs. Organization name is Osborne Pro LLC. Organizational unit is Tobor Mint. If you're a member of a domain, you're going to need the domain after this, basically the contents of your Etsy hostname file. So since I'm not a member of a domain, I'm just keeping it Tobor Mint. And I just explained the OU, and I should have put certificates there, but it's not that big a deal for our situation here. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. The common name is what I was referring to. The common name needs to be the contents of your Etsy hostname file. For me, it's Tobor Mint instead of tobor.osbornepro.com. Email address, and we'll do info@osbornepro.com, and now I have my certificates to use. The next thing we need to do is create the directories for all the users. So since I have it set up in the config file that every home directory is going to be home, the username, FTP, and then files is going to be where documents and files can be uploaded and downloaded from. That is the directory we have to make for all our users, as it does not exist by default. So to do that, what we're doing here is first we're becoming the root user, so sudo-i. Now that I have done that, we're going to create the FTP secure user, which I've done already. And the reason for that is this user is in the config file as well, and that is set up so when the vsftpd daemon is running in the background and it's not needing to access the files system, it's going to use this non-privileged user to perform its actions, and this is a least principal or least privilege security setting basically. And the chroot dir directory for FTP secure is also set in the config file, and we'll have to check it later offhand. I'd say it's var FTP something empty. So it's an empty directory is what they typically call it. Another thing we're going to do here, you'll see if I do ls home, we can get a list of the users, right? So we can put that into a variable so that we can create a directory for all those users. The other thing, if you wanted to do it from the etc password file, we could do something like users grep bash, let's etc passwd, and then we'll pipe that to cut with a delimiter of this field 1, and that should cover us. And you can see the root user Tobor, you know. So we're going to do it the other way, where we did ls home. Beautiful. So next in line here is we're going to add each one of those users to the user list. So if somebody is on inside this file at vsftpd.userlist, they'll be allowed to access the FTP server. If they're not on this user list, they're not going to be allowed to sign in. So we're going to copy these contents here, where, as you can see, we're making the FTP files directory and assigning the appropriate permissions. So a quick way to do this is if I paste in the text editor and just remove all these comments, we can copy and then close without saving and then just paste. Alright, so now we got all that set up. Typically what you'll want to do, I've done this already, but we're going to move the default etc conf file into a file with a .org for original extension, and that way we have the original file in case we ever need to reference it for whatever reason. It's a good idea to keep a backup copy. Next thing we're going to do is download and replace the etc vsftpd.conf file using my GitHub configuration file here. And now we have that file downloaded, and for anyone interested, it's being downloaded from this site, which is just, you know, this is the contents of the file basically. So now that we have that, typically what you want to do is make a backup. This way you know that you have a working backup configuration in case you change something and you can't get it working again. It makes it easy to either compare things or just restore from a backup so you got things working as fast as possible. The other thing I include here is based on whatever firewall you're using, the commands to allow the ports that we set up. So port 21 is of course the FTP port, port 20 is the FTP data port, 40,000 through 41,000 are set in the configuration file as our FTP passive ports. So we're allowing that. Alright, so now that we have the service installed, the folders made and permissions all set, we're going to reload or restart our service here. So we'll restart vsftpd.service. Should have done sudo. I think I did that wrong. Alright, so now we've restarted our service. I'll be able to connect to it. And just to show the listeners going, we'll grep port, oh, not 22, sorry, 21. Alright, so we grep port 21. Now to connect to it with FileZilla, we'll do that first. We simply do FTPS in a similar to HTTP or HTTPS, we do FTPS, semicolon / Tobor mint. The username is Tobor on the computer. I'm going to enter that user's password, and then port 21. And we can see here, this is the certificate that I generated earlier. We can also see that protocol TLS 1.3 is being used. And actually one thing I'm going to point out with that real quick. At the bottom here, where we have SSL _ TLS v1 equals yes, that is actually the strongest version of TLS version 1 available, and not TLS version 1, because there are also TLS version 1.1, TLS version 1.2, TLS version 1.3, which is now currently the highest. So if I were to connect to that using OpenSSL, let me get down the screen a little more so you can see better. OpenSSL as client connect, excuse me, as client connect, Tobor Mint on port 21, and we're going to use TLS1. And as you can see, no certificates returned, so we can try TLS_1, no certificate returned, but 2 does return our certificate, as will, I don't know if this has, yep, 3, as does 3. And again, that setting can look a little misleading, but it means the strongest version of TLS1. So now I'm going to click OK to trust this cert, and I successfully signed into my files directory, which has a test.txt folder there. Now if I want to sign in from the command line, I can use LFTP, which is not installed by default. If you want to install it, simply sudo apt install LFTP, and then it would install it if it's not already. And now we're going to use that tool to connect to our FTP SSL server. And to show you why we're using this real quick, if I were to just do FTP Tobor Mint, and then we kind of get stuck at this screen because it needs SSL communication going on, which it doesn't have. So that's what LFTP is for. So again, FTPS, similar to HTTP and HTTPS, to Tobor Mint. And actually we're going to do this. So there's 2 ways to do this. I'll show you the first way here. So Tobor at Tobor Mint port 21. And what that is going to do is prompt me for my password. If you wanted to use the password in the command line, you want to put a space in front of the command, and this will prevent logging this command to the history. And then if you wanted to include the password, you would do a colon and then put your password in parentheses to make sure any special characters are not interpreted, and it would be like, this would be the correct way to do that. So the other thing we need to add here for SSL, since we're using a self-signed certificate basically, is we need to do this. We'll set SSL verify certificate, since it's not from a valid certificate authority, and we'll set that to false. And alright, now I enter my user's password, and I have successfully signed into my server via the command line. Also here, I'm not able to upload files to this directory. I have to change directories into that files folder. So right now, if I were to try to put, it can't be done. I need to cd into files, then I can put the file in there. And now you can see, oh great, both are there. I can also get files, so I'm going to get, and I downloaded a file from the FTP server. So that's how you do that. There's one more thing I'm going to cover here with the anonymous downloads one. I think I'll do, because it requires creating a public directory and goes over some anonymous settings. So we have installed the application already. We already have our OpenSSL certificate. Now what we need to do is make this folder. So we're going to do that. Then what we want to do is set the permissions on it. So we're going to set the appropriate permissions. We have our user FTP secure already. Next we're going to create our email passwords file. And what this is a collection of email addresses that can be used as a password by the anonymous user to access the FTP server. If anything is entered into the password field that is not inside this file, the anonymous user is not going to be able to sign in. And the other thing I do is set the permissions on that file, so to apply least privilege, which is 640. And if you're excuse me, if you're not familiar with these, The read permissions is associated with the number 4. Write permissions are associated with the number 2. And execute permissions are associated with the number 1. So 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. So the number 7 indicates that all those permissions are assigned. The number 4 indicates that only read permissions are assigned to members of the group, and other permissions for basically everybody else has no permissions to that file. So we've made the original copy already. I don't want to overwrite that with my current copy. If I want, I can make a backup, which I have done, and you'll see here that I have backup config files that I can interchange with Etsy vsftpd.conf based on whatever situation I'm in. So maybe I want anonymous downloads or anonymous uploads or FTP over SSL. I can simply quickly copy that file over by doing copy Etsy vsftp.conf.anon upload to Etsy vsftpd.conf. That would overwrite my file, restart the service, and that would load my new config. So currently what we're going to do is download the anonymous downloads configuration file from my GitHub, overwrite the Etsy vsftpd.conf file, and then we'll restart the service to reload our configuration. And now if I want to connect again, you can see I'm not going to be able to log in with the local user here. See, anonymous only. So if I'm going to connect, now I'm going to show you how to use the password. So if we do anonymous, and if I were to just do A here, right, this is going to fail because the A is not inside that file that I set up. Login incorrect. So it needs to be, notice it doesn't go on my command history because I have a space in the beginning there. And we're going to go back to anonymous, and this is going to now be one of those legit email addresses, osbornepro.com. And I should do this in case that character is interpreted. And now you can see I'm inside the file successfully. And to go over a couple things in our current config that may be important are, right now what we have set up is anonymous enable. That means the anonymous user can sign in. This is the anonymous user's root directory, so that's the one that we created with our commands earlier, var FTP public. Local enable means that local account users cannot sign into the server. No anonymous password, that needs to be set to no whenever secure email list enable is set to yes. If you want the anonymous user to just be able to sign in without a password, you would set this value here to yes, and then this would of course be no. If you want, you can do commands denied or commands allowed, and that allows you to limit a user even more. Since this is just simply a download server, I only want, I don't want, this is just defense in depth basically, where I prevent uploading things through another means by denying put and input. This is all preventing uploads. The UMask permission here is basically reversed. So as I mentioned before with read, write, execute being 7, 7 minus 0 is 7, 7 minus 2 is 5, 7 minus 2 is 5. So this would be the same as doing chmod 755 to every file that gets uploaded. ls recurse I have set to no. For this instance, really it would be okay for me to set to yes. What this prevents is ls-R, and that's recursively listing the contents of a directory. If there's a ton of stuff on an FTP server, this can use a lot of resources, so that is why it's recommended to set to no. Also hide IDs. We are hiding the user IDs so the anonymous user is not able to get any kind of user information on files inside of the FTP server. No priv user set to FTP secure, and that is also hand in hand with secure chroot dir, which is var run vsftpd empty. So anytime the vsftp service is running in the background and it doesn't need to access the file system, it runs as this user inside this directory. It's a least privilege security security setting we're applying here. Of course, we have our ports. This is where I set the passive ports for our firewall, and our typical port 21 for FTP. I have the IPv6 listener turned off. I have done that because IPv6, if not manually configured in your environment, can be susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks, especially with tools such as MITM6, which can be used to grab passwords and capture files and things of that nature, or even password hashes. We have some logging configured here. You'll notice I have syslog enable turned off, and I have done that because I don't want my FTP logs going to the syslog file. I want them going to this one that I have defined here. And xfer log is basically another log formatting, so I have all the FTP logs from xfer as well as vsftpd going to the same file, so they're all kind of centralized for me. With the banner, you can set just a simple line such as this, or if you want to use a banner file, you can do that as well. That allows you to use multiple lines more easily. You'll see these mostly in your log files. And if you don't want to use SSL, you would change this value here from yes to no, and then you would comment out all these values here. And in my logging, good, I have that down here as well. So yes, you would comment all this out and change this to no if you don't want to use FTP over SSL. My warning against that is, of course, FTP uses clear text, so if credentials are sent in clear text over the wire and you don't want to normally do that, avoid that whenever you can. However, that's the benefit of having the anonymous FTP user set up with emails. So that is that file. I'm going to download my other one here again real quick just to look at a couple, or we're just going to look at a couple settings here without downloading it. Here you'll notice I have allow writable chroot set to no, with the anonymous access that is set to yes. What we're using instead is this for local users. So when we have local users, instead of allow writable chroot no, what we're doing is this. So we have local root set to home user FTP. We covered this one, ls recurse, subtoken, syslog enable, and that looks like everything I wanted to cover. Another, just to mention it in case I haven't already, is the CMDs allowed is very tricky to get going correctly, because if you don't include all the commands that you need, the FTP server connection won't load correctly and you won't be able to issue even allowed commands. So I tried to create a starting point for that for you, but really I recommend using commands denied if you want to restrict, so you can restrict whatever command you need to. But I hope you found this helpful, and thank you for watching.